So let's talk about the smarter AI assistants. Been several versions now that had tools to be able to integrate large language models and their capabilities into computations you do. And we also sort of pioneered the chat notebook of using notebook type paradigms of a reusable document that has inputs and outputs that preserves a record, but also can be run on again on a future occasion to the chat world as well as to the computational world. One of the barriers on that has always been that you had to get your own access to a large language model. So you had to go separately to, and you had to pick from one of the many providers. And we tried to support as many of them as possible. Generate a key, pay for that separately, add that into your Wolfram language and application, and then it would work. So for the first time in this release, we're adding Wolfram provided LLM access. So if you have the appropriate subscription with us for your Wolfram language technology, that will just work out of the box. So when you open up and log into Mathematical, Wolfram 1, or the Wolfram Cloud, whichever is your preferred way of accessing our technology, if you have the Wolfram LLM subscription, it will just all of those LLM functions and the chat will work out of the box. Now, along with that, we've made some changes to the infrastructure for chat. So if I just get a notebook up here, one is that assuming you have access to an LLM, either through us, or you can still use the old technique of having, if you already have a corporate key for OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever, you can use that. You don't have to use us for the chat functionality. But now every notebook is a chat notebook. So without me having to say, start a new chat notebook, I can interact in a chat style through the notebook interface from the moment that I first start. But we've also added some extra intelligence to the assistants that we've had. So partly that's through improved interface, but it's also partly through smarter tooling and backend. So in the toolbar now, there's a couple of new choices here. And one of those is a sort of inspiration suggestion button. So if I'm in a given context, let's say I'm right here in the middle of this, I'm writing some piece of courseware for students or something about the sine function, I can click the little light bulb and it will suggest something sensible that I might say next. And I'll get several choices here, and I'm not going to think about which one too much. I'm just going to accept that choice. And it's completed the sentence or completed the paragraph or even suggested where my document could go next. Maybe I go a bit further here and say its plot is very recognizable. And the context of where we have the cursor now really matters within this. So if I click the suggestions button now, this time I haven't got the cursor in a text cell. I've got it in a computation input cell insertion point. So it comes up with a sensible piece of code that I might want to insert there, and I can accept that. I could say, well, maybe this wants some options. So if I put the cursor inside the code and click the button, then it suggests some options here. Maybe I want to have some axes labels, and eventually it's, oops, I've got too many brackets there. And there's our kind of synthesized code. So that's sort of contextual awareness of where you are, the kind of thing that you're in the middle of doing. If I select some broken code and select it and click the button, it'll suggest ways to fix the code. There's much more context awareness in the. We also have a new interface paradigm for it, because the chat notebooks are great if you are using chat as your way of building up your work or interacting with the system. But sometimes you kind of want an idea and you're not sure if you want it or not. You're looking for inspiration, suggestions, and then you don't want to have to keep deleting things that you didn't want. So we also now have an assistant that sits outside the notebook. So if I click on this, I've got a separate session, but it is still aware of the contents of the notebook. So it knows what notebooks I have open. It knows what's in them. It knows where the cursor is in the notebook. So it's very contextual. Even though I'm now in a separate window, we've got an environment that is aware of what I'm trying to do and how far I've got. I'm going to do something completely different here to illustrate a different point. Let's do something like plot the elevation around Durham, UK, where I went to college, with a map overlay. So I can ask it to make some suggestion for me here. The reason I've chosen this example, hopefully it'll do something sensible for me. So it's coming up with some suggestion here outside of my current notebook, which I may or may not want to use, but it's going to hopefully appear in a moment. So the reason why I want to show this example is that over here, what you can see is it's had access to the resource repository. And in fact, behind the scenes, it has access to documentation, help messages, and we're not just using LLM innate knowledge anymore for using Wolfram language, but its ability to read documentation and things like repositories means it can find things that are even kind of newer than the last time the LLM was updated. And it helps to improve the accuracy of the code that it synthesizes to know that there's an appropriate resource function that could have been used here. So it's a combination of a smoother workflow with better interfaces that have these kind of contextual awarenesses. And it's also all these back-end tools that make it, for the task of writing Wolfram language, much more powerful than before, because it's getting external prompting on helping it to write sensible syntax and get examples. If I ask it for an example in space, it can search the help system for examples that match my description and things like that. So all in all, that barrier of getting started with the Wolfram language, or if you're a light user and you're not kind of familiar with the thousands of things that it can do, the ability to be able to get something done without the high expertise knowledge is much more powerful.